The way this game started, it felt like the Frostbank Center was going to start levitating. It had been 9 years to the day since San Antonio had hosted a Western Conference Finals game, and they practically broke the record for most consecutive points to start, combining absolutely ferocious defense with incredible shot making. But give credit to OKC. They didn't panic, just patiently focused on getting the ball to their spots and relying on the fact that the Spurs were not going to keep shooting like this. Ultimately, this game was decided primarily when Victor Wembanyama went to the bench, when the Spurs got outscored by 19 points in 9 minutes. And while it seems that Spurs coach Mitch Johnson wanted to avoid the initial matchup of Caruso guarding Wemby in the first quarter, bidding adieu to his big man so early in this game was a mistake. Without this advantage on both sides, it cost them a chance to widen the huge lead, something they wish they could have maintained for a longer stretch, as they got outscored by 30 points over the final 43 minutes of game time. Before we go deeper into those non-Wemby minutes, we've got to discuss a huge controversy that's been brewing around SGA and that pushy off-arm of his. So I had to bring college referee Chip Clarke in to break this down, since there are so many upset Spurs fans who can't understand what the heck is going on. So, Chip, we desperately need your help here because we've got some plays to go through. And let's just discuss the first one that everyone's been talking about all night long, and it's been all night, is this play that SGA does with Bryant. Before we even get to the part where he has a contact in the defender and all that stuff, there is some bit of an arm bar going on that seems to make everybody really upset about SGA in general. So can you walk us through what you're seeing here and why there was no whistle on that part of the play?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I understand why people ask about this. One of the most controversial parts of SGA's game is his off-arm movements. So on this particular play, we see Carter Bryant actually have a decent defensive position, although he's off to the side. One of the things SGA does really well, especially on the ones where he's not called for an offensive foul, is his off-arm does a good job of glancing across the chest of the defender. So it's not used as a battering ram. It's not used to go to and through that defender. It's enough to just kind of glance off them. You can actually see that it extends. Well, that extension is not an elbow to wrist extension into the defender. The initial point of contact is with that glancing elbow across the chest, and that's why it extends. That's not him extending through the defender. Therefore, this is correctly no called. It's not an offensive foul. He's really, really good at using his off arm in this way.
So I'm seeing like not even connecting to the contact with the chest, more like the hip area, a little bit lower. And then the glancing, yes, when you start to see him extend the arm, which is sort of the big, thing in terms of the rule book, right? How the extension of the arm has to be such that it would cause an offensive foul. It looks to me like it goes toward like the baseline. That doesn't even have an impact on the defender as he's straightening his arm. Do you agree with that?
That's correct. And one of the things SGA does as well is he makes more of a downward motion as he's coming in with his off arm. And it's not up where it's going to be something that really is overt for the officials to see. It's one of those things where he does a good job of going down with that glancing contact. And it is more to the hip area here. I 100% agree with your analysis.
Well, let's move on to another comparable play that we had heard a lot about earlier in the playoffs when we had Paul George defending Jaylen Brown, who thought he was being targeted by the referees for a lot of similar actions where they were calling fouls. So is there anything substantially different about what Brown did in this play that warranted an offensive foul against him?
Yeah, there are some substantial differences. And even though I do think Brown maybe had a point on one or two of the offensive fouls he was called for in that series, I don't think this is one of them. One of the things we're going to see here is, in contrast to the SGA play we just discussed against Carter Bryant, we see Jaylen Brown move upward with his off arm and create contact to the shoulder of a defender, which is Paul George, and that knocks him off balance and turns him. And that's one of the reasons he's going to be called for an offensive foul. Contrast that with what we just talked about with SGA. You don't see that downward glancing contact. You see an upward delivering contact to the shoulder of Paul George and dislodges him. And that's why that was correctly called as an offensive foul.
I also think that what you worry about with these types of plays is how it can affect their confidence with the ball. It's something every NBA player on the floor tries to avoid at all costs. Like we saw on this play when SGA got his shot blocked and OKC couldn't find Vassell in time for this 3-ball. The key is for SGA to address it the second it comes up, which is why our sponsor BetterHelp is such an important mental resource for anyone facing their own challenges that can hold them back. It took me much longer than it should have to strengthen my nervous system enough to perform under the heavy pressure of a basketball game. But it doesn't have to be that hard when using BetterHelp. since you can choose to communicate with their licensed therapist whichever way makes you most comfortable. You simply take a quiz to get matched with a therapist and switch at any time with no extra cost if it's not the right fit. Just click the link in the description to get 10% off your first month of therapy. Stephon Castle could sure use BetterHelp as he's been struggling mightily with his outside shots in this series. And as we all know, a huge percentage of shooting is mental, as this isn't a bad shot per se, but they could have hunted something a lot better. These are the non-Wemby possessions that tilted the game in OKC's favor, especially when you have Caruso out there jumping Castle perfectly and then recovering. Had Wemby been in there, I doubt he'd have continued to hover in the lane, but Kornet's assumption that Castle was going to shoot it saddled him with a 3-second violation. Again with Kornet in there, he'll hover in the lane, which is allowing Williams to be in good position to stop the ball, and Wallace doesn't have any urgency to close out to Harper, who is also shooting very poorly from 3 in the series. With Kornet directing traffic, he strangely arranges the matchup so that he's not guarding Jay Will, but SGA instead. They do switch him off of that matchup, but it directly leads to Vassell getting beat back door. Watch Caruso continue to make great plays. Instead of just hanging out in the weak side corner, he actively cuts and is there to keep this air ball alive, and they get their second chance 3 ball to fall. The Spurs wanted to have Kornet drop in front of SGA with Castle chasing around the ball screen. That works okay until Johnson steps to the ball as well, and 3 defenders surrounding SGA is too many, leaving Jay Will wide open for another 3. Meanwhile, on this Harper drive, he definitely looks less explosive from his injury, but Castle must slide down to the deep left corner for potential skip pass. Instead, Harper gets stuck with a poor option and a miss. The Thunder try to go big with Chet and Williams in there, but it means a slower player guarding Keldon Johnson, and this contest won't do anything to a guy shooting as well as he is in this series so far. There's a reason good defensive coaches preach no middle, because you can see the options McCain has when getting the ball inside the paint, where he decides to just pull up for the open 14-footer as the Thunder get inexorably closer. And then if we flip around and look at a play where they actually called SGA for one of these off-arm arm bars, we go back to Denver when they were playing, and he gets into the lane. We see as he drives into it, he kind of pushes off, and they give him the foul against Watson. So what did he do differently on this play that did warrant an offensive foul?
Yeah, so on this play, this was really, really difficult to determine whether an offensive foul occurred or not. As SGA moves forward into the defender, what he does is he actually kind of launches forward with that arm bar as his lead, right? So he kind of launches forward towards the defender, and he has that contact into the chest. He doesn't do a full arm extension on this play, but he kind of launches forward with that arm bar, creates contact as the defender is kind of pedaling to the side and backpedaling, throws him off balance and takes him out of the play. In addition to that, the reason why this is tough is there's also, I believe, a bit of foot-to-foot contact with the defender as he's launching into him with that arm bar. And I think that also affects the balance as well. A lot of times we see foot-to-foot contact ruled as a defensive foul on the defender, but as the offensive player is launching forward and delivering contact, many times you're going to see those called an offensive foul.
Absolutely. And that actually, this parallels nicely with another baseline drive we had with Jaylen Brown against Kelly Oubre, where I don't know if you really felt like this was a legitimate offensive foul or a good call or not. What do you think?
So at first glance, I was kind of on the fence. We go back and we talk about what we just talked about with the SGA play in Denver, and there's a lot of parallels here. All right, we see Brown launch towards Oubre as Oubre's moving obliquely backwards towards the baseline to continue his guarding position on Brown. And as he launches forward with that off arm, he uses it into the chest or the torso, of Oubre and steps on his foot at the same time. Again, foot-to-foot contact is usually illegal against the defender, but this is a situation where, just like SGA did on the other play, Brown launches forward with that armbar, creates contact in the torso of Oubre while stepping on the foot and causing foot-to-foot contact. And you even see from one of the angles where Brown was saying his foot was in my path, I stepped on his foot. Yeah. And then the official, Ray, he says, I know, but you pushed him off.
Yeah, and the far baseline angle for me, you can see it's a jab, almost like a boxing move, even though the arm is bent. That just seems to me a lot more overt than anything we see with SGA. With it's both a jab with the shoulder and then the elbow going into him. He's only falling, I think, because of the foot-to-foot where he steps on his foot as well. But let's not forget the foot-to-foot contact generally is called a defensive foul when the offensive player loses his balance to the point where he will either fall down or really almost fall down. And that certainly wasn't the case in this one.
Yeah, absolutely correct. And I agree with that. Those quick abbreviated movements where they launch into and kind of throw that arm bar at them and then kind of pull back immediately rather than just kind of a glancing contact we see SGA do. A lot of times those are going to be more overt and stick out to the ref more as a dislodge than an actual just minimal movement to create space.
Well, let's get to another play here where we now talk about the component of getting the defender up in the air and then jumping into him, which, I just compelled to tell you that for the last, 50 years, this has been an accepted practice when you get the guy out of his shoes and then you jump and you can jump into him a little bit. Now, let's not mistake the fact that we have a rule now that they added not that long ago to try and avoid the overt launching that could hurt a defender. But at the very least, we've had a lot of precedent for this kind of a play. And yet people now, I think it's only because it's SGA, honestly, is what it feels like. But, they're getting so upset about these plays. Here is one where they actually called it a foul on SGA for jumping into a defender. And explain to us what happens on this play.
They're trying to limit the unnatural shooting motions. And so if you go back and watch the NBA official points of education videos on abnormal or unnatural launches or leans into a defender to seek out contact that otherwise would not have occurred, those are the ones they're trying to get out of the game. On this play, what you see, SGA gets the pump, he gets the defender jumping, but the defender's not jumping towards him directly. He's jumping off to the side of SGA. SGA then, in order to seek out contact that would not occur otherwise, abnormally launches and leans forward and delivers that contact to the defender that would not have occurred if he had not made that unnatural motion. And that's why he was called for the offensive foul, not just because that he initiated the contact, but also because of the result of the contact, which caused the defender to then fall to the floor and be taken out of the play. That's why that's ruled an offensive foul call. If it did not take the defender out of the play or cause him to fall to the floor, that would be simply a no call.
Oh, okay. Great point as well. Now, which then leads you to believe that perhaps defenders are going to embellish all of that to make sure that component is fulfilled as part of the rule. But that one's tough. Larson looks like he's in pain. I think he went down. He took one right into like the solar plexus, if that's even what we call it now, and he got the wind knocked out of him.
Larson was definitely in pain on that one. Usually for NBA officials, obviously they watch a ton of film. They are really good at judging between whether or not a defender flopped on the play or actually was disadvantaged by the contact.
Well, now let's compare that to what SGA does in the original play we talked about at the start, where he ends up drawing the foul on Bryant, because there's some similarities to this. And now I'm trying to figure out exactly why we would give SGA the foul on this play.
That's a great question. With this play, SGA had done his step back and established his left foot as his pivot foot. Once he's established that, just because he got the defender in the air jumping towards him with the pump fake does not mean he's not allowed to pivot anymore. And you see him pivot by stepping forward with that right foot while his left foot, his pivot foot, was on the floor. And then he decides to start launching from there. But by then, the contact has already occurred as Bryant jumps into him. And that's why this was correctly deemed a shooting foul.
Yeah, and I think the contact spins him around, so it makes it look a lot worse than what people are thinking in terms of he wasn't even facing the basket. But, that said, if you're stepping through to shoot like a floater from the elbow area, I think it's a real fine line between, you're starting to govern, when you can shoot a floater. Like you should be able to step in and shoot a floater from the three no matter what. And so I suppose the other part of that argument would then be you can do a step in floater from the three if there's no defender in front of you. But if you're going to do it where the defender is up in the air, it feels like it's obvious that that's what he's doing, and then they all then expect the referee to say, okay, I now see what you're doing, and then we have to call that an offensive foul, which you probably have seen in the past as well. And so my only worry is that you start to legislate the freedom of shot selection that a player would have if you say they can't, that's unnatural, or you can't shoot that shot. Is there a difference between shooting a floater off both feet from the three-point line with nobody in front of you and with a defender in front of you in the air?
No, not really. I mean, once we start legislating what offensive players can and can't do with their pivot foot or with stepping through or anything like that, I think the game's going to be in a bad place. We're not doing that. So it's a situation where, sure, I think that SGA was probably seeking out contact there, but he did so in a way that's not considered an abnormal or unnatural launch or lean. He never launched. He never leaned. He simply stepped forward with his non-pivot foot while his pivot foot was on the floor on this Bryant play. And then as he's starting to go up to shoot, Bryant crashes into him. So that's a situation where we can't legislate that out of the game. The offensive player still reserves the right to pivot or step through if they would like to, if they still have those privileges. And this is not considered an abnormal launch or lean. He didn't even launch yet.
Well, let's go to the end of the game where the game was already decided at this point, but we got Wemby up in the air on a shot fake by Cason Wallace. And Wallace does do a very similar move from the three-point line, and there is no call. Referee had a beautiful view of it. So what makes this a no call versus how SGA was able to get it earlier in the game?
Yeah, that's an excellent question because in my opinion, I'm just going to be honest with you, keep it 100, I thought this should have been an offensive foul called on Wallace. Here's my reasoning for this. We go back to the SGA play two plays ago where we talked about where he jumps off both feet into the defender and creates contact that otherwise would not have occurred. Now, on this play, Wemby does leave his feet and is jumping across the face of Wallace, okay? He knows that Wallace is starting to launch forward and into him, and so he tries to bend his body forward to avoid that upper body contact just in case there's a chance that the official might call a foul on him. Mm-hmm. As he bends forward like this, Wemby does, Wallace this would classify as an abnormal launch forward to seek out contact that otherwise would not have occurred. And we see as he launches forward, there is lower body contact to Wemby as he's bending forward, okay? And in that situation, I believe that contact to the hip of Wemby is what causes him to fall to the floor and be taken out of the play. In my opinion, a no call isn't the correct decision on this play. I would have liked to see an offensive foul called on Wallace in this situation.
I got one more piece of context you might like is that with the a lot of times when you shoot floaters, no matter where you are, you have your split foot. So you have one foot in front of the other. This one, he is planting both feet even like a three-point jump shot. Okay. Sure. And so that then becomes unnatural for sure, because you would never jump that way toward the basket for a floater anyway. And so, right. Yeah, it gets pretty ugly pretty quickly in terms of the angle of his body on that one from that distance with the defender. So I could easily see what you're talking about now, which I kind of was skeptical in the very beginning when I heard you think about an offensive foul, but that makes a lot more sense to me, especially when I'm in that context of he literally was just trying to almost like everything started like a regular jump shot, and it certainly doesn't halfway through. It's not. And then that would be abnormal.
Yep, exactly. And I understand the no call on this play, but I also believe that, and if you're able to see that lower body contact as Wemby is bending over, you see Wallace launch forward and create that contact. Mm-hmm. And I believe that's what sends Wemby to the floor, even though he was already off balance a little bit by bending forward to try to avoid the contact. He wasn't going to contact Wallace at all, if not for Wallace abnormally launching forward into him. And because of that contact, creating the fall, I think an offensive foul would be warranted on that play.
Well, Chip, I can't thank you enough for breaking this stuff down. This is really good stuff. I think people are going to get a clearer understanding of this, perhaps tone it down a little bit in terms of the vitriol that we're seeing. But again, this is a tough game to referee, and these games and the pace and everything must be almost impossible to try and keep up with. So I'm impressed so far with what they've been doing.
Yeah, I am too. And I expect there to be some more questions too in regard to this, because the off-arm movement and these quote-unquote push-offs, they're tough plays to officiate. So I can only imagine how, if they're tough plays to officiate for these NBA refs who have studied film, studied the rules for decades to get to this point in their career, I can understand how it might be difficult for some people to grasp the nuance of these rules just by seeing this few-minute video. But hopefully we did move the needle a little bit and give some more clarity.
For sure. I want to be on the record as saying there are some of the SGA ones that they need to get. And I haven't seen one from last night, but every once in a while he does get, like we saw with Jaylen Brown. Those are the ones that need to be called more. And so we have to see what happens in game 4. But thanks so much, Chip, for coming on, breaking it down, and we'll see you in the next live.
Happy to do it. See you soon.